And if you die, if you are mistreated, then it's my karma. I gave you the opportunity to go there. It will be on my head. And Prabhupada assured her that actually he had to fulfill the mission of his guru. And within a few months, Prabhupada was boarding the Jaladuta. Now, Prabhupada was the ambassador. He was Krishna's ambassador. He was presenting Krishna's mission. He was presenting the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains this knowledge to the warrior prince Arjuna. Krishna explains how we're not the body, how the body is slowly growing older from age to age. We're youth and middle age and old age. But we're not the body. We are the eternal soul within. And Krishna explains the different processes of yoga. The karma yoga and jnana yoga and buddhi yoga. Krishna also explains the nature of the cosmos, the nature of the universe. He explains how he is the Virata Rupa. He reveals that form to Arjuna himself. And that form of the Virata Rupa, the universal form, there are many mouths and many faces and many arms and legs and torsos. It's mind-boggling. At one sense, it's wondrous and magnificent. In another sense, it's devastating and horrific. It's both the divine and the horrific in the same breath, in the same scope. And Krishna finally explains that he is the source of all spiritual and material worlds, that he is the dearmost friend to all beings. He is guiding all beings. He is within their hearts. And so Prabhupada is taking this message of Krishna, this message of Bhagavad Gita, this message of love. Prabhupada himself, he says to the American audiences that we are not advocating Hinduism. We're not saying that you become a Christian or a Jew or Muslim or Hindu. No, we say just try to learn how to love God. That's all. This is Prabhupada's simple message. And another time a reporter was asking Prabhupada, why did you come to America? Prabhupada said, I've come to make Christians better Christians, and Jews better Jews, and Hindus better Hindus. This is why I've come to America. And so he came. His boat landed in New York City. In the 1960s, New York City was the cultural and financial capital of the world. All the big business corporations, all the finance was done. New York City was the hub. And so that's why Prabhupada thought that let him go to the most important city in the world to see what he could do there. When he got off the boat, Prabhupada explains that he didn't know whether to turn right or whether to turn left. He didn't know what to do. But he was met by the traveler's aid. The Agarwals, Prabhupada's first destination, just north of Pittsburgh. He went there, and the traveler's aid met Prabhupada at the request of the Agarwals, and they brought him to the Wheeling Greyhound Station, the New York Greyhound Station, and then he took a bus up to Pittsburgh, where Mr. Agarwal met Prabhupada, and he stayed with them for about a month in Butler, Pennsylvania. But finally he came back to New York City. Now he was prepared. But to do what? He still had so much difficulty. Prabhupada himself describes that he was loitering in the streets. He had no fixed residence. He really didn't know what to do or how to proceed. He was just being tossed around like a leaf being tossed around in the wind. But Prabhupada, he met some musicians. One of them became Mukunda Swami. And these musicians, they wanted to help Prabhupada, because Prabhupada's whole meditation was based on chanting, was based on music. And so they wanted to help Prabhupada. And they chipped in some money. And they were also like hippies. Prabhupada really, at that time, didn't know so much about the whole hippie culture that was developing in New York City in the mid 1960s. But because of these musicians, they got a storefront for Srila Prabhupada on 26 2nd Avenue. This is right in the heart of the hippie culture. You know what they say about business? It's all about location. Location, location, location. So Prabhupada, Krishna arranged that Prabhupada had the most advantageous location in the middle of the hippie culture in the East Village, only a few minutes walk from Tompkins Square Park. But now so many questions arise, because you wonder. Now these young men, they donated a little money to make a down payment for Prabhupada to get him started. But will Srila Prabhupada be able to present this teaching to the Western culture? Will he survive? New York is very heartless, very cruel. People go there and they're chewed up. Some people succeed and they become very famous. Other people fail miserably. And they fail so miserably they're ready to take their lives. So what will happen now to Srila Prabhupada? But the thing is that this teaching of Bhagavad Gita is not new in America. Way back in the 1800s, people like Emerson and Thoreau and Walt Whitman, they studied the Vedic literatures. They studied the Bhagavad Gita. This is what Emerson says. And by the way, this is a quote from as early as 1831. This is very early. And so he is very, very much attracted to the teachings. He says, I owe a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was as if an empire spoke to us, nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us today. So he saw the universal element, the universal teachings, how vital they were, even though they were they varied according to time and according to distance. Still, this teaching was very vital to every human being. Now, later on, at the end of the 1800s, another celebrity here in America went to India. This celebrity, his name is Mark Twain. He was having some financial difficulty. And so he went on a world tour. His books were famous all over the world. And he spent 2 months in India. He was immersed in Indian culture. He saw the magnificent temples. He saw the culture. He spoke to the philosophers. Now this is, after 2 months, this is Mark Twain's conclusion. India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. The most valuable treasures of history are stored up in India. This is an extraordinary realization. Mark Twain, he sees the beggars in India. But he says that materialistically, we in the West, we're very rich. Indians are the paupers. But spiritually, we are the paupers. And the Indians, they are the millionaires. They have the religion. This is the conclusion of Mark Twain. Now, in every culture, usually it's the writers and the poets that begin to examine these things. And a generation later, after the World War I, Other books start coming out by Hermann Hesse, for instance. Siddhartha is a very famous book, and Journey to the East. They begin to talk about the Hindu philosophy and to talk about the lost treasures of India. One book is called Lost Horizon. It's also made into a movie. And even Somerset Maugham wrote The Razor's Edge. These are also both about how Westerners go to India or get lost in India, in the Himalayas or whatever, and they discover, excuse me, they discover a guru. This is a movie that came out in the 1943 with Terrain Powell. He was a very famous actor. It's the Razor's Edge, and there he goes to the Himalayan mountains and meets a guru. Now, as we proceed, after World War II, this all happens after World War I. All of these books, all of this inquiry started to happen. Because after World War I, people are so devastated by the war, they're so emotionally disturbed, emotionally crippled, they are referred to as the lost generation. And they begin to inquire into the Vedic culture. A similar thing happens later on. After World War II, there's two other new phenomena that arose shortly after World War II. This is one of the phenomena right here. It looks like a typical, ordinary little street, right? But after World War II, what we know, what is commonplace today, something happened after World War II, is the rise. What do you think? Yes, the suburbs. Now they started building suburbs all over America, outside the big cities all over America. And because everybody has their own home now, they all need the most modern conveniences and modern appliances. They need everything. People are buying up all sorts of the latest technological conveniences. Business here in America is booming. In the 50s and 60s, Prabhupada, actually, he used to say that here in America, all you have to do is put your hand in the air and money will fly. Money's flying. You could put your hand out and you can catch the money that's flying. It's very easy to generate business here in America. So business was booming. And never before did so many people have access to so many comforts and conveniences. Before World War II, people lived in little towns. Some of them had cars. Some of them had still buggies and horse buggies. But now young people, they all needed a car. They all needed a television. They all needed transistor radios. Back in the 50s, it was like the computer generation, the internet generation of the 90s. This was the latest technological conveniences that the young people had to have. Now, beside this extraordinary phenomena, you have another phenomena. Anybody would care to, what would the other phenomena be? Here it goes. The Beat generation. Just like after World War I, there was the lost generation who was dissatisfied. Now the Beat generation. God dead. People were wondering about these philosophical points. And it was such a burning question that even Time magazine, their main issue, they were put this question on their, I think it was April of 1965. So, you know, the hippie culture, they had a slogan. Because now you have the Vietnam War, the old people, they're getting us into another war. They're telling us stupid things like to hide under a desk if there's a nuclear attack. They're preventing people from getting the social justice and civil justice in America. So many things were going wrong. So the hippies, they had a few slogans. This is one of the slogans that the hippies had. Anybody care to guess what that slogan may be? Here goes. Don't trust anybody over 30. You can't trust the old people. The old people have gotten us into this mess. We can't trust them. So they began to reject the teachings of the schools. They began to reject the government. They began to reject the teachings of the church. And another thing that one of the other slogans, yes, turn on, tune in, drop out. That was their most famous slogan. Another one was make love, not war. So the hippies, they had the psychedelics. Psychedelics are these mind-expanding or mind-altering drugs. And they also lived in communes. Men and women, girls and guys, they were living together. They didn't care. One of the main things about the hippies was the music. The music was all-pervading. Everybody loved the music. The hippie movement expanded tremendously because of the music. That's why the beatniks, they only had poetry. They didn't have the music. But the hippies expressed themselves through music, and that took off. That became widespread. Because the beatniks and the hippies, they weren't so much different. But the beatniks only expressed themselves through writing and poetry. And this was not mass media. For the young people, the music was the mass media, the way to spread the word. And people like Janis Joplin and the Doors, Bob Dylan. Actually, Bob Dylan, in the early 1970s, here's a picture of Bob Dylan with the Hari Nam Chadar. He also was coming to the Hare Krishna temple. When I joined the Chicago temple in 1973, a month later, guess who comes driving up? Bob Dylan. He comes in, he's chanting with the devotees. He's also giving donations to the Hare Krishna movement. Some of his songs also reference the spiritualism of the Hare Krishna movement. And also Jim Morrison of the Doors. I don't know if you listen to the Doors, but this is a typical example. Jim Morrison, he had one song called Riders in the Storm. Now this song, it says, we are thrown into this world like a dog without a bone. We're simply riders in the storm. So the hippies, the young people, were saying, we didn't make any of these problems. We're thrown into this world like a dog without a bone. We're left stranded on a limb. What are we going to do about this? We're riders in a hurricane. All around us there's a hurricane and there's no shelter. Where can we find shelter? And as in previous generations, since the time of Emerson and Thoreau, what do the young people do? Again, they turn to the East. Not only do they go to India, like for instance, Allen Ginsberg, as early as 1962 and 63, he went to India. He was even in Vrindaban. And he came back chanting many mantras. And one of the mantras that Allen Ginsberg was chanting was the Hare Krishna mantra, even before Prabhupada came. Now, not only Prabhupada came to America, but so many swamis and yogis and mystics were coming to America. So it was rather a confusing time, because all of these things were thrown into the mix. Who to believe, who to follow. And Prabhupada had his little storefront on 26 2nd Avenue. You know, that storefront is probably smaller than these two walls. It's very long and narrow. It's very small. But Prabhupada really had no followers. A handful of people were coming to the storefront. But Prabhupada had a great vision. What did he call his mission? Oh, excuse me. The International Society. Prabhupada didn't say, well, it's the New York Yoga Club. No, he called it the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. This is extraordinary. And now Prabhupada goes out his international society was formed in June or July of 1966. That's when he moved into the storefront I think in June of 1966. Then the International Society was formed, and by October, then he starts going to Tompkins Square Park, chanting in the park. People were gathering together. There was an article from a hippie paper. It's called the East Village Other. On the title it says, "Save Earth Now." There's a picture of Prabhupada, and underneath Prabhupada is the Maha Mantra. Now, why Save Earth Now? The author of the article asked a devotee, "Why is Prabhupada, what's his mission?" And the devotee said, "His mission is to save the earth now." And so the reporter thought, "Oh, well, this sounds like a good title for my article." So he put it on the top page, the front page, "Save Earth Now." And not only the hippie paper, but even the New York Times, the New York Times also picked up on this event in the Tompkins Square Park. What does the New York Times say? The Swamis flock chants in park to find ecstasy. 50 followers clap and sway to hypnotic music at the East Side ceremony. Now, this came out a day after Prabhupada was chanting in Tompkins Square Park. And when he saw this article, now this year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of ISKCON. Last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Prabhupada's arrival in America. So since the beginning of last year, I've been taking this slideshow to different colleges and to different places to share with people this historic event. But even though the devotees, they say that the ISKCON was incorporated, I think it's in July of 1966, after Prabhupada saw this article, he says to the devotees, "Now my movement has begun." For Prabhupada, the incorporation of ISKCON a few months earlier, that wasn't the beginning of the movement. But when he took Chaitanya's movement out into the public arena, and the main newspaper of the world, the New York Times, acknowledges that event, that here this Chaitanya mission had been transplanted here in America, then Prabhupada expresses, "Now the mission has begun."